Hi, welcome. My name is Mike Hatfield, and yeah, we're going to do our round robin testing. So I'm going to go over what you hopefully have received or will be receiving in the mail very soon from us for the first phase of the testing, as well as some of the equipment that you're going to need, and then we're going to go over step by step the protocol of the first phase of the testing. Alright, let's start with the contents of the box that we're sending to the labs. If you open up the box, there will be a packing list included, so you can verify that all the items are in there. First thing you want to do is to pull out the blue box that contains the stainless steel pot the stove will be testing for the first phase, as well as the batteries for the first phase. So, first we'll look at the stainless steel pot. This is going to be the standard testing pot for all the round robin tests we now do, and it'll be a pot you can keep to use for future tests. Stainless steel pot without a lid, and we have a lid included. I'll look at that next. Inside the pot will be the stove and the battery system. Just look at that. So we've sent with you 4 AA batteries. These are lithium batteries that are of a good quality, so let's keep those separate. We're not going to use any regular AA batteries you find. We're going to use these special for the testing, so we included 4 batteries. And the stove in a black bag. And all the stoves have been tested to make sure they're working properly. It's a stainless steel gasifier stove. Inside you'll have the stove body itself. 2 pot supports that go together like this and will be used to support the pot. A handle that is used for moving the stove around when it's hot. And a power supply that will hold 2 of the batteries for running the fan that is in the stove. The stove itself has a low and a high power, so we'll go over this again when we start the testing, but it'll be used in the high power phase. Those batteries are in. Alright, so that is the stove. Go ahead and and the final item is going to be the testing pellets. So we've sent with you 2 bags of testing pellets. They're labeled. One says fuel for future tests. So that is in a single bag, and this is going to be used for tests that you might do down the road to check, you know, if you change testers or if you want to check your equipment. But the moisture content has not been verified with this, so these will have to be checked for moisture later on. That's why I only wanted to put them in single bags. Then the test pellets themselves, we sent a little over 3 kilograms of test pellets. They're labeled as test fuel. Important, this fuel is used for the round robin testing. Please be sure to open only prior to each test and reseal after opening. So the moisture content for all the pellets and all the labs have been verified and are the same. And so we want to make sure this bag stays sealed and is only used and opened during the testing and for the testing. And then finally is the lid. So during the charcoal testing phase later on, we're going to use a lid in the round robin testing. So we're not going to use that now. We want to make sure that this lid is kept for future testing. And those are all the items in the boxes that we sent you. Alright, so besides the items that we're supplying the lab for the testing, your lab will have to supply a few items. Basically, it's going to be a scale for doing, if you're doing emissions or fuel use, you're going to need a calibrated digital scale that measures down to 1 gram. We also would like a container that is going to be used for weighing the pellets throughout the process. So we want to go ahead and pick a container, mark it, and continue to use that throughout the testing process. Isopropyl alcohol, each lab has been contacted earlier, and to make sure they could acquire isopropyl alcohol, we're looking for 95% isopropyl alcohol. There's been some people that reported that may be difficult, and we want at least 91% and above. Just you're going to note if it's not 95. But we've been doing tests, and they both 91 and 95 both light well enough indistinguishably, but we're going to shoot for 95% isopropyl alcohol. And then you're going to need a digital thermometer to measure when the boiling temperature, to be able to accurately watch the boiling temperature. So we cannot work with just like an analog visual thermometer. It's just too difficult to see, because for our protocol, we're going to need to know when the temperature reaches 5 degrees below temperature. So we really are asking that you have a digital thermometer. And other than that, you will need a testing location. Now we're going to want, this could in theory be tested in a place without a hood, but we would really think it'd be great if you have a hood that will pull the smoke completely away from the tester. So if you have emissions equipment or not, a hood is a very good idea. So hopefully a testing location, and that's the items. Okay, so the test we're going to be doing in the first phase of the round robin is going to be what is considered a high power burnout. And what we'll be doing is we'll be loading the stove with a amount, 325 grams of dry or low moisture content pellets. And then on top of that, we're going to be loading an amount of 75 grams of pellets that have been soaked in 95% isopropyl alcohol. So the method for doing that, just to make sure that that variable is standardized, is we want to have all labs soaking their pellets for 24 hours. That way the amount of alcohol that gets absorbed in the pellets will be uniform. So the first process for testing is to, 24 hours before an actual test is going to be done, is to soak our 75 grams of pellets. So what we want to do is we want to have our chosen pellet container that we know the weight of, and we have written that, we'll write that down into our basic test data sheet. 20 grams. Weight of pellet soaking container. And we'll go over the sheet in more detail in a bit. Then we want to load into that 75 grams of dry pellet. That's the point we want to open up our pellets. Test fuel for testing that is in a double bag. And in there we'll load 75. So as our dry container weight was 20, our weight of our pellets, dry pellets, plus the dry container will be 75 plus 20, or 95 grams. Okay, we're at 95 grams, and we have our container. The next step, let's go ahead and seal our pellets up. Anytime we're done with using pellets, it's a good habit to reseal them to make sure the moisture content is not going to change. Alright, the next process is to take our isopropyl alcohol and to cover the pellets. Put the lid on, and now we're going to allow the pellets to soak for 24 hours. Okay, so once you have your pellets soaking for 24 hours, we're ready to actually do the test itself. So we have sent to you a detailed step-by-step list of the protocol itself, but along with that we also sent you a specialized data entry sheet for this test, as well as software for processing the results. So let's first take a little look at the data processing sheet. Like most of our data processing sheets are set up so there's an area of basic test data for all tests, and then there is this area below where the data for the test itself throughout the test will be taken. Each column is set up so you fill up one column and you're ready to light the stove. The second column marks the end of a next phase, and the final another column will mark another significant phase. So in the sense of this test, this high power burnout test, we were calling it, you basically light the stove, we're going to bring it to a boil, and then once it's to a boil, we're going to mark down a couple data points, and then we are going to allow it to burn out, which means when the temperature starts to drop and it's dropped to 5 degrees below the rapid boil, that's going to be the end of our test, and then we'll write down a few more data points. So let me walk you now step by step through the process of the test. So we're just going to go one by one, and we'll start filling these out. Air temperature right now in Oregon is 30 degrees C. Fuel dimensions is really just a reference question. So for us, it's going to be pellets. So we're 8 mm pellets. Gross calorific value for our Doug fir pellets are 20,634 kilojoules per kilogram. The moisture content of the pellets that were sent out were 3%. And then the dry weight of the pot. Let's come back. So we're going to take our dry weight of our pot with no lid on our calibrated scale. 720. Dry weight of pot, 720. Empty weight of stove. So this is going to be somewhat important. Anytime we're going to be weighing the stove, we want to weigh it in the exact same fashion, meaning that if it has pot supports or a handle or a power supply, if we weigh it to begin with without, make sure anytime in the future during the test when we're weighing it, we want to weigh it in the same condition. So it is going to be the stove body itself, and the weight of it is 498. Now that's going to differ with each stove by a few grams, possibly, so you're going to want to weigh that one yourself, your stove that you have with you. 498, dry, empty stove. All right, local boiling point. So for every location, as well as every digital thermometer, is going to have a slightly different boiling point. So our thermometer in Oregon has a boiling point of 99.1 from past tests at rolling boil. All right, the name of the tester, go ahead and put your name. I'll put Mike. The date, so today is 7/30, 2014. And the stove, so this is a Tom Reed, I'm going to call it, but you can call it T-lead, either way, or gasifier stove. I just want to make sure you can reference it later. Test number, so this is going to be the first test. Fuel type is Douglas fir pellets. And location for us is ARC. You will describe your own location and any notes that you want in particular to do. So this will be the basic test data. Go ahead and zoom in on that. Alright, so once our basic test data is filled in, the next step will be start filling the first column so we can actually start the firing our stove. So the first step I like to do is to weigh the weight of the pot plus water. So we put on our empty pot, and as you'll see in the data collection sheet, one of the things will be the weight of pot plus water. So we're going to be doing a test with 2,500 grams of water. So the weight of the pot plus water will go into that. And as the empty pot is 720 grams, 2,500 plus 720 grams would be 3,220. So I'm going to go ahead and write that number, 3,220 grams for weight of pot plus water. And now I'm going to add water. Now one thing we're asking is that we try to start with water that is 2 degrees plus and minus 25 C. And the reason is because if somebody comes into a test at a very cold climate, and let's say it's around here, sometimes the water is around 7 or 8 degrees Celsius. Well, that can throw off the test if we're working with a batch-loaded stove. So as we have determined this test to make sure it can boil the water, if somebody was to have a really cold test, cold water start, that might throw that off. So we just said let's try to eliminate that variable by asking people to have water that is relatively similar temperatures, so plus and minus 2 degrees of Celsius. So I'm going to take my temperature reading. So what I do when I do that, oh my goodness, I'm there. Luckily in Oregon right now, we're right there. So that's 23.3, that would be fine. But what I would do if it wasn't is I would add hot water. So I have a little pail of hotter water because I know our water tends to be less than 25 degrees. And what I do is I would go ahead and load up at least the 3220, the right amount, and then I'd add water till it's the correct temperature. And once it got to the correct temperature, then I'd go ahead and with a cup pull out water till I was back to that 3220. And that's the easiest way to get to a mass of water that is exact right temperature. All right, so luckily for us, we're 22, let's say 22.7. So I'm going to go ahead and follow my own instructions, bring in a little bit of colder water. There we go. So it looks like we're right in the zone. Time to equilibrate a little bit. All right, we're going to call that good. So then what I do, one of the other things is the Temperature of the water. So water temperature, 24.5 degrees. Starting temperature of the water. Now, what I want to do to make sure I have the correct weight is I now see that I have a little more than is necessary. I'm going to get a cup. I'm going to pull water out until we have the correct amount. 3220. Okay, now we have the correct amount of water. We're going to put in our test location. All right, we have sent with you 4 very nice batteries, lithium batteries, that will be used for this testing. They have been shown in testing to be very good with slight fluctuations of temperature and as well as last and remain at a constant voltage over many uses. The one thing we do want to make sure is that we, as described in the protocol, is that we are using rested batteries. So that's making sure the batteries have at least sat for 24 hours. So in that reason, we have given you 4 batteries. Each stove uses 2 batteries, but that would allow you to do up to 2 tests per day. But we want to make sure the batteries are at least given 24 hours to rest in between to make sure they recover to full voltage output. If you have the ability to take a voltage reading, we put a spot in the sheet to go ahead and take a no-load voltage of your batteries, just for reference. If anything goes wrong in your test and things seem odd, it's great to have data about that to see if that might have been one of the variables that caused that. So we allow for that, but it's not mandatory for the test, so I didn't include it earlier in the mandatory and necessary equipment. What you want to do next is, if there's a voltmeter available, you want to load your batteries into the power supply, that is. Making sure, obviously, to follow the directions of how the battery should be placed. You know, these are 1.5 volt batteries, and they have a little knob at the top, and there's a little drawing inside to make sure you place them in the correct fashion. And then once you do that, if you have a voltmeter, relatively easy to take a voltage of by taking your power supply and having one of the pins be placed inside and the other on the outside. So 3.61 is the combined voltage of those 2 batteries. So like I said, it's only if you have a voltmeter available to you. Alright, the next step will be to load the stove with the 325 grams of non-soaked pellets. Alright, so we start with the weight of our, once again, similar to the pot, we have a weight of the empty stove, and then we're going to be adding, the data we're going to be entering is the weight of the wood, which is 325 grams, plus the stove. So plus our stove, which is 498, adds up to grand total of 823 grams is the data we're going to enter into the weight of wood plus stove. But that is going to vary a little bit for you depending on the weight of your stove. It should be similar, but it may not be exact. So we now want to take our test pellets. You know, and one thing about the test pellets, as they were shipped to you, hopefully they did not get too damaged in shipping, but we did send a little bit extra just to make sure. So I would go ahead and recommend that the bag sits upright and allows for any small little dust particles of the pellets that may have broken transport to fall to the bottom, just to be safe on that variable. So we're looking for a total of 823 in this case. There we go. And we want to have a somewhat even level of pellets. Just do the best you can. Just make sure, if it was built up on one side and low on the other, that might throw the ignition as well as the combustion process. So we want to go ahead and just try to do the best we can. Evenly layer out those 325 grams that we put in. All right, the next step, if the pellets have been soaked, let's go ahead and seal up our pellets. Once again, to make sure that the moisture content does not change over time. Double bag, seal that also. All right, so once we have our 325 grams of dry pellets loaded, the next step is going to be to add the soaked pellets on top in preparation for lighting our stove. All right, so as the pellets really should be soaked an equal amount of time, 24 hours, and the same pellets and the same alcohol, they should have absorbed similar amounts. But just to be safe, we're going to go ahead and record. We're going to drain the alcohol from our pellets, and we're going to go ahead and record the weight of our container plus our soaked pellets, and we're going to record that. And that's just going to allow for a little information if we see anything, once again, that seems to be highly variable. Now, how you drain your pellets is up to you. You can get a screen, you can get a fine spoon, something that just doesn't allow pellets to through. I'm going to go ahead, do a little drain like this. You just want to make sure you don't lose any of those pellets into your and then you end up with a bunch of soaked, drained pellets. All right, the weight of that container is now 106 grams, and in that way we can know basically how much starter alcohol was actually in there. As we had 20 grams starting with 75 was 95, I can tell you there was 11 grams of alcohol that got absorbed into those pellets. All right, so we're going to go ahead, once we drained it, we'll record the weight. We're going to evenly distribute upon the top of our stove. Let's go ahead and bring it over to our testing location. We're going to evenly distribute those pellets. Now this is a real secret for TLUD testing, is to make sure that you have even lighting along the top of all the stove. If you have most of the pellets on one side, or you're lacking pellets in any one area, that part below it will not light evenly, and you're going to end up with a different combustion process than you would if you didn't. So we really want to take a little bit of care to make sure we evenly distribute those pellets. All right. Okay, once we have our our stove loaded with dry fuel, as well as the layer of 75 grams of soaked pellets on top, we're going to want to go ahead and, as quickly as you can, light the stove to make sure there's no evaporation that happens. So this is going to be a little more long-winded, but for you, once you get going, it'll be a little less. It'll be a little more speedy. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to place the pot support on top. The actions are going to be to light the stove. We use a little fancy lighter like this, but a match or any type of lighter will work. And then plug the fan in right away, as well as place the pot on. And so that's going to be those actions right away. We also use a support for our thermocouple, which keeps the thermocouple at the correct depth of water. You want the bottom of your thermocouple to be about 5 centimeters above the bottom of the pot. So it's very handy to have a little wooden support for that. So alright, so this is going to be the lighting procedure. I'm going to turn the fan on so the gases are taken away, so there'll be a slight bit of background noise. That's why I wanted to go over that first, but then we'll do our lighting procedure. Place the pot centered over the stove for safety as well as for even thermal efficiency. And then mark the time that we did that, which would be for us in military time or local time 14:50 is the start time. And now we just wait for the water to come to a boil. So go ahead and zoom in on the completed first column test. Okay, so once it reaches your rolling boil temperature for your location and your thermometer, which for us is 99.1, we want to mark down the time. For us is 1500. And then we want to mark down the temperature, which is your rolling boil, 99.1. All right, and then the process really is just to watch the temperature until it drops to 5 degrees below boiling. So if your thermometer has a min and max function, then it's really easy. For us, we just turn our digital thermometer off, turn it back on, and that resets the minimum. And then we move to our min temperature, and we just watch that. And that makes it very easy. If you don't do that, then you just have to watch the temperature and wait till it hits that 5 degrees below. So I always like to then write what is 5 degrees below on our sheet so I can watch it for that. So if 99.1 is our rolling boil, 5 degrees below would be 94.1. So I go ahead and write that, and then my job is to watch the temperature until it drops. All right, once the temperature drops to 5 degrees below temperature, the next step is to quickly do the following steps. Record the time. So we are at 15:21, and then we want to quickly follow the steps of recording the pot with water, 2591. Taking off our pot support and unplugging our power supply, we want to quickly record the weight of the stove body itself with the remaining fuel, 55. And then we go ahead and record, empty the charcoal out as soon as you can. We use a little charcoal container like this with a lid. And then we want to quickly plug it back in so that we allow the stove to cool, and we do that for 5 minutes to have the stove body heat up the fan too much. It makes our fan last. And that is the end of our test. All right, thank you.